But I just thought we might as well make a start. And
yeah, sorry, we could probably chat for a while and we'd railroad this one. Apologies.
No, it's okay. So welcome everyone to the Industrial Partnership Roundtable. My name is Vima Punde. I'm the Program Director for the NIHR Surgical MedTech Co-operative. And we are co-hosting this event with the incubator. And basically what I do is I oversee the MedTech Cooperative, where we support the development and evaluation of medical technologies for surgery. And what we do is we work with a lot of startups, a lot of academics and clinicians, and part of that also involves supporting people who want to develop further in terms of their career by providing sort of placements, or what we call I forgot, there's a specific term, but they're effectively placements, short-term placements.
Secondments?
No, not secondments. There's a very fancy word for it.
Internships?
No, not even that. It's probably something as silly, but it will come to me. But that's what we do as well. It was a whole lot easier pre-COVID because obviously people could come on site. And it also meant industry partners could also come on site to actually see what the clinical environment looks like, how people interact with that environment. And unfortunately, we're starting to have to figure out how that activity is going to look like. So what I'll do before we go into the discussion is I'll ask Mark, Matt, for you to do your introductions. Costa, I know you're sort of sitting there silently and you've probably introduced yourself. So Mark, if you'd like to go first, please.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Mark Slack. I'm the Chief Medical Officer and co-founder of CMR Surgical. We were a startup, I think you'd call us a scale-up now, in Cambridge, United Kingdom, building a next generation surgical robot for soft tissue surgery. We started in 2014 when there were 5 of us, and I now employ about 1,000 people, and we're a $3.5 billion company, having been very successful. We had the biggest medtech raise in the world, the private medtech raise in the world of a couple of $100 million. So that's so we work across multiple geographies in the world now. We have a big research program supporting it and a big medtech development program. So it's all been quite exciting. So lovely to be here.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks very much. My name's Matt Green. I'm the Global Head of Clinical Partnerships at Proximie. Proximie, similar to, as Mark described with CMR, is a startup that's sort of in scale-up mode, not at the same scale as CMR, maybe one day, but we're a slightly smaller organization. Proximie is a virtual collaboration platform that allows surgeons and clinicians and surgical teams in general to dial in, virtually collaborate from anywhere in the world. So we've been going, our founder is Nadine Haram, who's a plastic surgeon at GSTT. Proximie started about 6 years ago, and we're kind of going through that growth stage that Mark talked about with scaling up.
Okay, thank you. Seems we've lost Mark temporarily. I'm sure he'll come back. So thank you for the introductions. And for those that are watching, if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask, then I think somewhere on your interface, you should be able to request to be put on the screen, and I can let you in for that. Otherwise, you can use the chat function on the right-hand side of the screen as well, and I'll be picking that up. So in terms of starting the discussion off, obviously we're looking at that interface between industry and, theatre teams. I would like to, first of all, find out what's your experience of that interface? How have you found it easy? Has it been difficult? Has it been frustrating? What's been your experience with that? So let's start with you, Matt.
Yeah, so I thought this was a really interesting topic to discuss. That there's obviously a wealth of experience and knowledge and intellect within the surgical teams and theatre teams in general, and I don't think that industry interfaces as effectively as it can, as often as it can. And I think that there's lots of opportunities to do that more effectively. One of the things that we've done at Proximie recently that's been really valuable for us is look at things like the patient pathway for colonoscopy and and kind of map that out from an end-to-end scenario. And we've brought in the surgical teams, the theatre teams, to help us show where there are efficiency gains in that pathway. And those insights are unique because it's very easy to go to the surgeon or the registrar and ask those questions, but it's generally the wider surgical team that can give the more effective insight. So I think that kind of example of utilizing the experience is something we should do more. And it's just, I guess it's trying to find the right way of doing that in amongst all of the pressures that we know are there with the workforce, and how we can support those moments to happen.
Mm-hmm. And same question to you, Mark. What's been your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends what stage you're at as well. When there were sort of 20 of us, we had lots of young engineering students who came and did a week or two with us, and then came back in the longer holidays, and then came back and joined us when they graduated from Cambridge. So we had quite a lot of Cambridge homegrown people, some of whom still work for us. And as you got bigger, that becomes more difficult. One, because we've got to be very careful not to recruit from a single entity. And we've got to throw it much wider. We're a global business now, so we've got to consider all the different geographies as well. So it becomes a whole lot more difficult to do it effectively. The other one is there remains, unfortunately, in some quarters, a skepticism about industry and about the work done in industry. Is it ethical? Is it honest, etc., etc.? Which is why in my keynote I highlighted that fraud and lack of ethics is the domain of everybody, whether they're academics or not. And I have a wonderful book called Scholarly Misconduct, which looks at medical fraud. And I can promise you the contribution from large academic institutions is considerable. So one of the things I try and do is encourage a breakdown of the barriers between them. So I sit on the University of Cambridge as one of the investment councils, and our aim there is to help young researchers get their research funded, to get it established. And in fact, industry, I've spent in my company, I've spent a fortune on research. And and as Matt said very correctly, it's not just a matter of dealing with the surgeons. That's your first mistake you can make in a modern world. So I'm about to appoint, I have medical advisory boards. I have medical advisory boards of doctors, nurses, anesthetists, and my latest one will be patients. Yeah. And so, you need all the people to give you the real insights into what you're doing and so on. And then the other thing we're very keen to promote, and I'm very keen to promote, is academia within what have always been less sexy specialties. And some of my people from my closest advisor in the robotic field in my company is a nursing scrub nurse who's been in the robotic industry for 20 years. He knows more about robots than I'll ever know. And and so it's finding career paths for people like that as well, both in a career path, just working and doing a job, and in a research path as well. And so that's something we're looking at all the time.
Yeah. And I think you raise an important point, when you mentioned not just dealing with surgeons. I think it's everyone always goes for the surgeons. Everybody always wants that big name. But as you mentioned, with the nurse, they're the ones that actually understand how all of this actually works. On a practical level, it's a similar concept as well for pharmaceutical studies, whereas the research nurses that actually do the job.
So the best example of that is doctors in theatre. There's always an argument: should or shouldn't you be allowed to have music in theatre? Yeah. Now, when I was an operating surgeon, there was no music in my theatre, and there was no conversation. Mm-hmm. You can only speak about the patient, and nobody that wasn't supposed to be there was allowed in there, unless they were agreed to be observing. And people loved the atmosphere; they thought it was really good. Yeah. But the counter argument to surgeons who tell me they like the music, I say, fine. So if you like the music, How does your anaesthetist like the music? And how does your nurse like the music, etc., etc.? It's not a one-man show or one-woman show. It's a team.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to let you know, V, I am here. I had to make sure that the other session was running. So
don't worry, that's fine. Thanks, Costa. And also in terms of including other healthcare professionals, there is also the thing about including patients and people who are actually going to be impacted by the technology that we're obviously developing. For example, with us within the surgical MECA, we place a lot of importance on, for example, patient medtech focus groups, where patients genuinely want to know what these robots do. They want to know what these new treatments are. It's not a case of they're going to tell you, oh, actually, you've designed a terrible robot. For them, I think it's more an educational thing, so that they can actually understand what's going to happen to them. Because, as we can understand, robot means different things to different people based on the exposure and, experiences of different parts of it. So it's absolutely important to do that and improve that exposure to just what technology is there. And, in terms of the fraud and all the bad stories that have happened, I know in your presentation you mentioned the Netflix series, which I did watch, and we got questioned a lot on by patients. I think it's just understanding, what processes are there to safeguard that. So the skepticism is equally as important, as in terms of not just involving patients and other healthcare professionals, but if we do want people to use this technology, they need to understand exactly what's gone through with that.
I would just add to that, because I missed the first question. I definitely think it's important to involve all stakeholders, both taking a bottom-up approach, but also a top-down approach, because the two will meet in the middle. You'll get something come down from senior management, but unless there's that adoption at the grassroots level, it'll struggle to get take up. But then if the top-down level sees that actually doctors and nurses and operating theatre staff are bought in, then everybody will move in the same direction together to help that adoption between the various parties.
Yeah, and I mean, that goes back to Matt's point about workforce pressures. So workforce pressures existed before COVID, and then COVID came, and then obviously everything went a bit crazy for a bit. And now we're trying to come out of that those woods at the moment. So in terms of workforce pressures, have you had any dealings? So there's a question with you, Matt and Mark. Have you had any dealings with the clinical settings since we've started to come out of COVID? And have you noticed any difference in terms of how people want to interact with industry partners?
Mark, do you want to lead on this one?
I think I will sort of view it in a slightly different way. The universities are all becoming aware that actually their slightly isolated approach has not necessarily been good for them. There's only ever going to be a limited amount of funding. It's going to come in a particular direction, and that will also be dependent on the subject that you're dealing with. So I need to get an up-to-date figure from a talk I'm giving in America in a few days, but there was a statistic once where the health research funding in the United States, 3.5 billion was on cancer, 1.1 billion was on cardiac disease, 900 million was on all the other disease groups. Now, that's not going to change easily, and that's one of the areas where industry can sometimes bridge a gap because they have a technology or something. But, we as a company believe that, it's very important to be part of the ecosystem. So we want to contribute to training. We want to contribute to research. We want to contribute to development of it in partnership with groups. And so one of the big ones now is we are looking with, we actually have now partnered with NHS Wales, and we will be going into NHS Wales with our system. And the idea there is to shorten waiting lists and improve outcomes for cancer surgery. When you're working with an entire ecosystem, you can have a very big impact. And that then starts opening up opportunities for as Matt mentioned, patient information leaflets, or I don't know which of you mentioned it. Somebody meant, getting patient information leaflets done properly with people. It's I always say to people, the robot is just an interface between the patient and the surgeon. What goes around the robot is what's important in the healthcare ecosystem, and that's where this is, which is also important.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, V, we're one of the platforms that's really looked to support things through the pandemic and then post-pandemic. I guess we're sort of pivoting to be a more effective collaboration platform for the surgical teams and the theatre teams in general. So we've all learned different ways of working during the pandemic, and our whole platform is engineered around connected surgical care. So we've been very much at the forefront of virtual collaboration and tele-mentoring, a tele-presence in one way or another. And we've had scenarios where, lists have not had to be cancelled because you've been able to have a presence in the room with a senior surgeon or someone that needs to be present via the platform. So all of those ways of working have been really valuable to keep things ticking over. And as we now look to the priorities within all of the healthcare markets, really the elective backlog or the surgical workforce, what we're focused on is how platforms similar to Proximie can really be a supporting structure for the teams. So we work really closely with Asset, and a big part of that is around no training today, no surgeons tomorrow, and where you've got the ability to record surgical cases and utilize a platform like Proximie to do collaborative reviews and allow trainees to get through their training more effectively because they've missed cases, and that has a wider scope for the entire surgical team, the theatre team in general. We try to support new nurses coming into theatre and utilize the platform to collaborate and support. So I guess it's a really long-winded answer to your question, but digital tech and tech transformation are buzzwords that are thrown around a lot at the moment around post-pandemic recovery. But what we really need to focus on is where there's some tangible, actionable insights that can support the teams be more effective under more pressure. There's no getting away from that at the moment, and look at how this change in paradigm can be effective for everybody.
And I just add to that point, I see a lot of medtech startups, scale-ups that are doing engagement platforms within the NHS. One that comes to mind is ImproveWell, which is kind of a digital engagement solution, giving everybody a voice and giving real-time insight. And really, all these tools are all about empowering local leadership and gathering instant feedback. But it's also if people use those platforms, because if you don't have that mass adoption or internal buy-in, as I mentioned, and it's just going to be sitting on a system and nothing's going to be happening. So it's a cultural thing, not just here's the technology.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good point. I mean, part of that, everything's in evolution with my company, but it happens at 100 miles an hour. And one of the things is, we want to start a proper, more formalized. So most of the PhDs I've handed out, I've found the people interesting, and I've just said, fine, I'll sponsor a PhD. And obviously we've got to formalize that now because I've got to be seen to be fair as well. And so I'm putting together a program where people will be able to apply, and there will be criteria, which I know always spoils the fun, but that's sadly the reality of the world. And then likewise, I really don't just pay lip service to it. A surgeon has a perspective of the theatre. An ODP has a completely different perspective of theatre, and a nursing member staff has another perspective. And so it's very, very important that we find avenues and ways of including these areas of expertise in the development. And so from my point of view, it is a win-win situation. if I've got I've got a young researcher doing a PhD in ergonomics at the moment. So that's not directly related to my robot, but it answers questions in relation to surgical, strain on surgeons with modern minimal access surgery. So, yeah. But we do need to, I think what's missing at the moment, we need more collaboration between academia and companies. I think we need to formalize those processes. I think we need to have less suspicion of each other. And I've come out of a pure academic environment to be in industry, and some of my colleagues sort of look at me as I've gone to the dark side. And I assure you, we do pretty refined and high-powered research, which is all peer-review published. And so the way is actually, we also feeling our way is to hear what people want in terms of their research, and also do impactful research. There's some rubbish PhDs as well. I want to support PhDs that are valuable.
Just to follow up on something Mark said there, V, if you don't mind, just for a second, we're partnering with a couple of research associates that study ethnography, and that's been a really interesting discussion for us, because the things you can do with Proximie is look at the context of theatre, and so rather than just see a screen where you've got the surgical site or the diagnostic machine or the anatomy, you can see the context of theatre and the flow of the teams, and you can see the way that the teams operate cohesively. And so we're looking at how Proximie can plug into that kind of ethnography view of things to look at operational efficiencies within the OR based on the way that teams are cohesive. So I think there's some really interesting points around that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what's also coming out is companies are keen to collaborate. They're desperate to link in with the other side, and provide the training and provide the support. So I was just thinking, is it a matter of people or the other side is not that aware of what companies could do for them, or is it just purely a case of people just suspicious of research and they're just staying out of it?
Yeah, I think this is the same across other industries as well as ours. I think you kind of operate in your silo, and you to a certain extent we've all kind of got our blinkers on to what we're focused on and what we're doing, and it takes effort, and it takes processes or defining process to try and think outside those boxes and include other people and include other insights and to gather those. But I think you're right. I think it's very difficult to think, I've got an idea that could be a research project, maybe I'll approach industry on it. And it tends to be like a lot of things for all of us. It's where there's a connection or where there's a relationship that sort of spurs that discussion, and then you pick it up. I've been in that many product development teams that are just as a result of someone happens to know someone that connects them with someone, and we've all got those scenarios. So I think industry absolutely wants and needs these insights, and we try to create those processes to include as many different voices from as many different levels as we can, and build that rich tapestry of knowledge. But it takes effort, and I think the more that we can try and find opportunities like this, where we're encouraging members that join in this meeting to get in touch and even just connect, and you never know where those kind of discussions will lead.
Sorry, I'll just add to that. Can you hear me, Vin?
Yep.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
That suspicion and those networks, that what I tend to find is that academia and industry work together when there's an outcome. So, for example, we kind of facilitate a lot of partnerships for joint Innovate UK bids between medtech startups and SMEs and the various departments within universities, where the SME has the innovation, but the university has the research and so on. So those collaborations happen where there's an outcome or a knowledge transfer partnership, let's say, or access to a network like the NIHR or the AHSNs, etc., rather than all some of these connections. So there needs to be more avenues, I think, to businesses that don't know about these networks, for example, because I think there's a lot of opportunities for academia to go through AHSNs and NIHR mix and so on, whereas those looking from the inside in, the outside in, probably don't know where to go and how to work with the university.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting as well that, obviously from an academic perspective, papers published is very important. There's sort of different focal points for that. But if I touch on that, Mark, you mentioned how you do a lot of work with Cambridge, with people based in Cambridge. And I know it's obviously you're based in Cambridge, it just makes it a whole lot easier. But how easy would it be for someone, for example, based in Warwick or Edinburgh to access the same opportunities, the healthcare professionals in Cambridge are accessing for your particular robot?
Well, I sit on the advisory council of Edinburgh University as well, so no, it really needs to be much wider, because otherwise, again, you get a unicentric approach to the type of individual. You'll be amazed by how similar graduates from universities are to each other. And so you do need the spread, and no university has the bottom line. I think, we need to develop an infrastructure, enhancing this collaboration. So, when you're doing work in the robot, sometimes I'm just pursuing, I've got to get something done in order to get regulatory approval, in order to go to the next step. And that consumes a huge amount of money. And then there's other stuff that we want to spend money on, which is just academically a good thing to do. And we know we're not going to produce a product from that in the next 10 years. But industries need to have it. If they've got the money, they need to have a maturity about doing that. But of course, it's what you've got in your pocket and what you can afford. And you can't expect companies just to do pure academic research on the never. But if you look at companies, one of the companies that always impressed me hugely was Karl Storz. So Karl Storz, the endoscopic company for minimal access surgery, they have always supported educational programs throughout their entire existence, which I think has done them well commercially as well, but certainly has helped young doctors who are doing small projects and young nurses doing small projects to get going. And I mean, that's what we're sort of working towards. I would like to be able to people to go into my website, see what our closure dates are, see what's available, and so on. And then also have a place for people to come to us and say, I've got a great idea. Yeah. And we are starting to, I have a team that looks at great ideas. They're not all that great, but it's important that there's an avenue for people to explore it.
Yeah. And you think maybe, there is a role for organizations like the NIHR to sort of act as that particular broker. So if people aren't sure or want to, tap into industry, or just find out if there's any space for collaborative efforts with industry and vice versa.
Absolutely. So I mean, some of the stuff that I want information on, it would not serve me to employ the people full time to do it. Yeah. It would serve me far better to go into a collaboration with an academic. So one of my ergonomic study is with an academic unit who specializes in ergonomics, and a lot of the work will have nothing to do with my robot. So I'm also getting from it. Okay. So it's working out the partnership that you can actually leverage the best possible outcomes for both groups.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd agree with Mark wholeheartedly there. We've got projects which are part of our product development mapping process, where we're looking at how we build out our collaborative review element of our software, and that's to the benefit of surgical trainees. And so engineers work on that, software engineers work on it, and we need input, but we probably don't need full-time involvement. And so secondments, and I mentioned before a partnership with Asset. We try and involve the innovation leads in those discussions to get feedback. So those opportunities are great. And I guess, as to your point, V, it's kind of knowing where to go to encourage that connection to happen. And if NIHR is a great opportunity for that.
I mean, I think these incubators have been a great idea, because they bring together I've certainly, the one that I'm on, which is run by Martin Birchall, certainly has, it's introduced me to thoughts and processes from people in different clinical areas that I possibly wouldn't have met before. And that's, so I see that as a very positive thing. And it's just, we need, probably for something like an incubator, you need greater funding so that you can actually, it's no use just having the infrastructure. You need to be able to have money to give out as well. And I'm sure one of the ideas there is to get, the industry involved so that they can contribute to that. And it's not just pure research. It's also things like patient information leaflets. It's if you talk about teleproctoring, it's an area that will get a huge amount of attention in the next short while, both from teaching people in the beginning and from maintaining skills as you go forward. If you're a pilot of a 747, right through the pandemic, they were still having to do their simulation training right through, even though they weren't flying. My wife did a PhD and had 2 children, and when she went back to work, they expected her to go straight back to work. Where she left off. Now that's just bizarre. Do you know what I mean? And there are things there. So we should be working. The educationists should be working for telementoring systems, etc. And I can see 20 PhDs just in that field alone.
And I would just add to that. I think that's so important to have the funding distribution, as Mark mentioned, because you also need a blended approach to finance, and there is external sources of finance beyond grants. Let's say investors, angel investors, and venture capitalists that have exited companies, know what they're doing, and are willing to put from small amounts, from 10,000 up to large amounts of millions in, and having connections to those as well as just normal grants would really benefit companies and the academic side as well.
Yeah, and I think, obviously, money solves some things, and it would be good if we had loads of funding, because I think you're absolutely right in terms of having a central resource to actually coordinate all of these efforts. And, I think if we want to strengthen those collaborations, as you've mentioned, Mark, it's about industry also being involved in some of the academic sort of infrastructure or clinical infrastructure units that are there, because that almost embeds that within the system. So seeing as we're drawing to a close, and just to round off that discussion, if money was no object, what do you think are the essential components to make this work really effectively? So to have these academic and industry collaborations that, provide a proper industrial partnership, what are the key elements you think need to be there?
It's infrastructure. You need a structure. So that's one of the places where something like an incubator is a good idea. We can have people from a variety of different backgrounds who meet on a relatively regular basis, where people can bring ideas and thoughts, bring industry into it as well. There needs to be more trust between the 2 different groups. And the minute mistrust comes into an area, believe me, if I go into work with an academic and I start getting an impression that they mistrust industry, then I'll walk away, because it's just not fun working, and obviously industry, has a bad reputation in some areas, but not all. And so I think trust is important, and having an infrastructure that actually people can meet each other and communicate, so that we can see what people want in order to set up these programs.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'm head of global partnerships here at Proximie, so I'm obviously keen to ensure that we've got partnerships that work for both parties. And kind of the lowest level of a partnership is where it's transactional and there's just a receiving of a service or a supply. The top end of a partnership is where there's no beginning or end to either parties, and you're fully embraced and you're supporting each other's goals and objectives, and trust is entirely the driver for that. As Mark said, to sort of take away those boundaries of industry being the big bad guy or however it's perceived. We're all trying to aim to do the same things. So breaking down those silos, encouraging collaboration where it's possible. It can only happen from discipline and processes that drive it. So a blank checkbook for that would mean taking away the additional pressures that are on the workforce in general to allow those freedoms to be able to collaborate. But you know, it would be lovely to be able to sit here and say, well, this is the silver bullet, and this is what would provide that. And we all know that there isn't one. It's multifactorial. But I think conversations like this are great. Incubators, you know, are really exciting because there are so many health tech scenarios that I can think of that have come out of this kind of discussion. And what's always really a little bit depressing is that when doctors or surgeons, clinicians, people who work within healthcare get a commercial idea, you can almost predict where it will run out of steam, and it's generally similar to startup scenarios. Really, it's where that grit and determination to keep it going just kind of takes its toll. So that combination of things is really valuable, where there's a commercial partner that can support those efforts and has that knowledge and has that understanding around the things that need to be in place from a regulatory point of view, from a focus point of view. It just sort of gives the opportunity for those ideas to have legs that can actually gain momentum and go. But yeah, I think you know, my answer would be that it's a discipline to try and ensure collaboration happens.
I would also add that I think networks come into it as well as funding. I agree to V's point that you know, funding is good, but it won't solve everything. You need all these factors to come together. As V knows, the amount of events that we run together with NIHR, and we try to facilitate a lot of connections that are based on the important part, which is mutual interest and mutual need. But there has to be that transparency there of what both sides are looking for to ensure that a partnership can get to those latter stages that Matt refers to. And when it comes out the other side, it achieves the expectations and the outcomes that people were trying to achieve at the beginning, and addresses the goals of the overall project or collaboration. And that might be, for NIHR, that might be unmet needs within the NHS.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure we could sit and talk for hours, but our time, unfortunately, is up. But I'd like to thank Mark Slack, Matt Green, and Costa. Thank you very much for contributing to this discussion. And I think if there's anyone who's watching and you've got more questions, then obviously you can request to be connected with the speakers through Costa and his team. They'll be able to facilitate that. And likewise, if you're interested in any of the work that the Incubator or the Surgical MedTech Co-operative is doing, you can visit our websites. We've got our booths in the expo. You can definitely send us an email through those generic email addresses that you see. And we'll definitely get in touch with you and we can continue that conversation.
Yeah, I'll just add to that for everybody. Through your registrations, we've been matchmaking you beforehand. And Gemma will be in touch after the event to introduce you to all the right people according to your challenges. But as V said, the event's open till 2, so you can go to the expo area, click on the surgical MIC or the incubator or the other booths, select SuperConnect Me, and we'll facilitate introductions for you. So after this session now, we'll all be going to the stage where we've got our final keynote and where you'll see me in a second. And I will be giving a summary to this session and the insights. So thank you to all our panelists for joining us, and thank you so much to V for chairing. And we will see you soon. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
All right, take care. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.